Just give me a moment.
Sure. Are we ready to go now?
Just give me a moment.
Sure.
You're all set?
Okay, so it's 4 o'clock. I'll call this meeting to order. Today is Wednesday, January 27th, and this is the Town Council Finance Committee meeting. The first item on the agenda is a call to order, and then those present. I am seeing all councilors are present. We have Betsy, John Cloutier, and John Anderson. So I think we can move right on to the approval of minutes from December 15th, 2020. Has everybody had a chance to review the minutes? Thank you, Colette, for pulling those together, by the way.
Oh, you're welcome.
Do I have a motion?
Moved.
Second.
Okay. Colette, would you call the roll?
Certainly. Counselor Glystein? Counselor Anderson?
Yes.
Counselor Clucci?
Yes.
Thank you.
And then we have a number of items for discussion today. The first is a financial report for the period ending December 31st. This is a regular part of our meeting, or I want it to continue to be a regular part of our meetings this year, is getting a quarterly snapshot of where we stand relative to plan. And I don't know, Tom or Ruth, if you want to start off the discussion or help to guide us through it. I think I'm going to have a lot of questions.
Yeah, just from a format point of view, I don't think I've mentioned this to this newly assembled finance committee, but the current format is, has been worked on and touched, I guess, by previous finance committees. And so it is really a reflection of what their expectations and to some extent their areas of interest were. And it occurs to us that that's not necessarily what your areas are. So I guess I'll speak for Ruth in that we're open to suggestions. If there's a different format or different information, additional information that you seek, we're certainly receptive to that input. So keep that in mind.
So if you want, I can actually go over all of this. Hopefully everyone's had a chance to read through it and take a look at it. I'd rather just respond to any questions people have, unless you want me to, read it.
John and Betsy, you okay firing questions away? Okay.
Sure.
I don't mind starting. One of the negative indicators had to do with the grants, COVID-19 grants. And in that we front that money, we pay it out of the general fund. Is that accurate?
We pay it out of essentially the town's general checking account, which is the general fund. And then as the money come back in, it goes back into the town's cash account, checking account. So it's a positive thing in that we're getting the grant monies. The negative is that we have to pay for it up front before we get those funds in.
So if you go to the next, a couple pages down where you have the school department breakouts, one of the departments was overspent.
Page 7, maybe? Or is it this one? Page 6.
No, you're right. Page 7.
Okay.
So you see the percent used, 433% for general and special administration.
Yes, I have a feeling that that's all grant related.
Is that grant related? Now, the other question I have is, I thought when we set the budget, you couldn't exceed the budgeted amount for a given department without specific action. Now, at school overall, they're okay, but
The school has the ability to do interdepartment within their own budget. They can make their own budget amendments.
through the authority of the school board, right?
Through the authority of the school board. I think it's just that bottom line that they cannot exceed.
Okay. And similar situation for us on the town side, as long as Tom's not, or somebody's not going after a $50 million grant, he has authority to do that within his budget as long as he doesn't exceed the budget, right? Or is that how?
It's the typical has been the department head will go to the manager and say, I want to move it from, finance department, tax office to finance department, accounting office. And, I can do that with Tom's approval internally. I just can't say, I'm going to take some money out of the planning department and move it to finance without going through the council.
Yeah, John, I think the distinction is the Board of Education is bound by the bottom line number. They can move within their department, so to speak, whereas my latitude exists kind of within each department. I stay within the authority granted to each department.
Okay. I think this is helpful as a lead into budget season, because sometimes we focus in on the minute details when really our authority, we set the department level budgets, right? And then you can shift things around regardless of what's in the line item budget after that.
Yeah, and I very seldom do, but there are occasions where it's necessary. If we have a particularly cold or snowy winter and we're over in salt and sand, I need to accommodate for that elsewhere in public works. That's the sort of occurrence that happens on a fairly routine basis. Remember, your budget is your best guess of what your future experience will be. And history helps suggest with some degree of confidence where that should be, but it doesn't always.
Correct. And then sometimes we have a new position. We put all of the benefits and wages into that one new position line. If it gets funded through the process, then we take the monies out of that one specific line and allocate it to the various areas within that department's budget. So there are those types of instances as well.
Okay. I have more, but I want to give Betsy and John a chance as well. Do you guys have any questions on the financials?
I have several, but I'll ask a few. Page 4, the library, I think, seems to be up, to 75% used. Can you explain this?
The library is paid on a quarterly basis, and it's just a matter of timing. For last year at this time, 2019, they requested their payment. Depending on when the year ended, they probably received the money prior to January 1st, which would have been the third quarter. So sometimes it's at the 50% mark, which is pretty much what it is for this fiscal year. And last year they must have gotten their funds a little bit early.
Okay, so there's no trouble there one way or the other. It's all a matter of timing.
Correct.
Okay, great.
Yeah, but Betsy, just to expand upon that, for our financial statements, we essentially make 4 payments to the library in roughly equal parts. And so that's not reflective of their actual expenditures. They then run their day-to-day operations and spend the money down, but we allot it out on a quarterly basis. So you'll see 3 chunks coming out of the town side, 4 chunks, excuse me.
Okay, great. And I think the line 66, you did do some explanation for, but I think last year we knew that we had under budgeted for that particular expense. And it looks like we increased the amount that we budgeted, but we're still over. Am I reading that correctly?
Yeah, we're a little bit over as of right now. So it might be that we'll have to take a look at this again for next year's budget and see where we end up with I'm sure with COVID and things that probably hasn't helped.
Right. And is it a matter of, I noticed on, not on this screen, but Public Works revenue was down. What drives their revenue? Or maybe actually, let me make sure I was looking at the right thing. Hang on a sec. See if I put a note next to it. It was departmental revenue by department. All right, somebody else can go ahead. I flip through and find my page. Yeah, go ahead. I'll find my request as I ask a few more questions.
It looks like Public Works was about 22% of the estimated revenue so far. So they're lagging a little bit behind.
Right. So I'm just wondering what drives their revenue. What is it?
They also, a large chunk of their revenues come from other departments. So they're kind of interdepartment revenues for supplies, vehicle maintenance and labor and fuel costs. But they also do receive some funds from other towns for the maintenance of that
So that could all be timing, not really.
That could just be timing. It
Okay.
could be that with COVID, that might have affected, the vehicles that were needed or something.
Okay.
Now, keep in mind, if our experience, and I think it is timing, but if our experience is such that due to operational changes, we're not using vehicles as much and therefore not as much maintenance is needed, there'll be department savings in the other departments that would be, paying out for goods and services from Public Works. There'll be a commensurate reduction in their cost, if you will.
And then, of course, I guess we do know that community services is still way behind on revenues, but we've kept all the expense. So are we looking at a plan for that, or?
Well, I mean, we've got a 12-month period. We do expect things may open up and programming come back to some level as the weather gets warmer and we get in a different position as a country, as a state. The summer in particular, with our summer camps and such, we do continue to have use of the facility on Payne Road through September or into September. And so a big part, you might recall, of that pro forma included running our annual summer camp out of that facility. So we're watching it carefully. I don't see the need to take any evasive steps at this point, and there's still opportunity for positive experience in that regard.
So, and this one has always kind of perplexed me, Tom, even though you've explained it well several times, but our summer revenue would actually be in the next year's
Fair
budget.
point. Yeah, fair
Right.
point. Yeah, I misspoke there. You're exactly right. That experience, anything after July 1st would appear in FY22's budget. Correct.
So I guess because this is kind of unprecedented, I'm just trying to understand if we aren't able to make it up, is it, to John's point, ultimately, is it, you come to the council with the request to take it from a different place? So how does that work if we can't make it up at some point?
I've never had to do that, and I don't intend to. So I suppose that's a possibility, but I will make every effort to stay within budget. I think you'll note, and I'm having trouble finding it myself, that community services expenses are down as compared to budget, in large part due to part of the way that we're handling staffing at for the hybrid childcare, and being mindful that our program revenue is challenged this year. So
Right.
Really, right along, we've been well aware of this and accommodating as best we can.
And normally if revenues are significantly not coming in, the town manager would then institute, kind of like a spending freeze or reduction or something, which we've done in the past. So a little bit in the past. So that's usually a way to do it as well.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, your point's well taken, because if I wait until maybe the end of the third quarter, there's not enough time to necessarily make those corrections. So I'll be watching this intently over the next weeks and month or so, and adjust accordingly as best I can.
Right. And will the grant money flow right to their bottom line, almost like it was a revenue? Will that work? Will it work that way? The money that we got from the school and then the money we got from the donor, if revenues fell short, will that fall?
Sorry.
Go
Most
ahead.
of the grant revenues flow through the special revenue funds. So if you were to look on page 6, chances
Okay.
are you're going to see large expenditures and large revenues. And that's probably related to the grants. Although I'm not 100% sure how the school handles theirs. So some of it might be in the general fund, some of it might be in some of their special revenues as well.
Right. Well, community services specifically got some of that money, right? That the
Correct.
It was around 54,000 or something like that. Memory serves. Have
Right.
Is that already money? Is that already accounted for?
No,
Okay.
on the revenue side, except for taxes and rescue, we do those pretty much on a cash basis as the money comes in.
Okay, so that could still bump that up some then.
Yes.
And then we have the commitment from the donor to make up the difference from the programming that they're running right now due to COVID. And that would flow to their revenue bottom line.
Correct.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah, and on the expenditure side, I think community services is about 39% spent right now.
Yeah, I
Normally you'd
saw
expect
that.
it to be closer to 50. So that's just a demonstration that we're trying to tighten the belt.
Well, it's not a normal year.
No.
for them, that's for sure.
not a
Their
normal
year is
year.
probably the most different than everybody's. So let's just bear that in mind.
Oh, I'm mindful.
Yeah, I mean, everyone listening, their year is the weirdest of all years. I mean, maybe outside the school, so.
So I got a funny tidbit. I was trying to figure out what our plan was for last year coming out of budget season. And this report is the only place I could find it because we made so many adjustments that were high level adjustments. So if I wanted to know what the fire department plan was, well, we never really settled that at the end of budget. That was something that was, I think, finalized or allocated after the fact. So it's just something I want to be aware of this year as we go through the budget process and make changes, that there's traceability. And so that at the end, we don't have to wait for the first quarterly report to come out to figure out what the budget was by department and whatnot.
I agree, John. A lot of that was in PowerPoints, and I lost track at some point. It was an unusual year. But, you know, it would be nice if the school and the town had a way to keep versions of that budget book spreadsheet as it gets adjusted. I did request that last year, but it was just a bridge too far with everything everybody had going on, so which was understandable. But I do think that's important, you know, to kind of have a better insight into that. But that's a good pickup, John. And, you know, at one point I'm like, I don't even know which PowerPoint to look at now to know where we're at. Yeah, so
the benefit,
weird.
It really made me try to figure this report out because I was trying to balance it to what was in the budget order and whatnot. And after some back and forth with Ruth, it does, but it's not intuitive necessarily. This is, I guess I'd call it more of an accounting view of the world, where we tend to plan on more of an operational view. Like in particular on the revenues, when you look at the tax number, that I can't make sense of it. And I think accounting doesn't always make sense to me. So that's probably why.
That's why you married a CPA.
Exactly. Right? So that she can think about that stuff.
I will say that this past budget process was obviously very unique, but the breadth and the depth of the changes, there was about $635,000 difference between the budget I proposed and the budget you adopted. And I guess more to the point, particularly the changes around COLA, you know, there are literally hundreds of line items affected by a single decision. And so this year was exceedingly difficult. And then you compound that with staff limitations and challenges over the summer and the fall. All of that is challenged us, but we're hopeful for a cleaner budget process.
And Tom, I think that 635 was after you had already done one set of adjustments for the current budget year. So
it was, yeah. I'm just saying that was the change the council directed from the time I proposed it. But you're right, I started with some fairly deep cuts already.
Right.
So if we go into this year, will you have a solid, detailed starting point? Like, will you? Oh yeah. Obviously, it looks like you've done it already, but the start of the basis for this year's budget book will be the end point, right? Oh
yes, I mean, departments are busily working on their department budgets as we speak. So yes, we have all of that in munis. I think there's a final piece we need to do to get that reported out into the spreadsheet. But yes, we will certainly have a clean starting point. We need to for budget purposes. I mean, that brings up a point that I just want to kind of make in passing. The theme of, and I'm meeting with department heads as we speak about their budget perspective and goals. You know, the reoccurring theme, no surprise, is kind of restoration. And just the sheer restoration, I'm not saying that we will try to restore all of that 635, but that's a feat in and of itself, not to mention any further investments or advancements for one reason or another. And of course, 4 collective bargaining agreements open, adds a challenge as well. So here we go again.
I do need to correct something I just saw that was raised. I don't remember if it was John or Betsy on the schools, general and special admin. We actually put that's on page 7, I think. Yeah, right there, where it showed that huge deficit.
Mhm.
In the line above it, it shows a budget of 4.7 million. It really is only 2,700,000 less than that, because the other 2,000,007 should be in that 279,295 revised budget amount.
Okay.
So once we make those 2 changes, then the budget for this line that looks like it's hugely overspent is really only
It's
just
not.
51% spent. So it's pretty much on target.
Now, Ruth, with the,
And I'll adjust that so everybody can have the corrected numbers.
another challenge, like on the expenditure side, I felt like this was fairly easy to follow relative to the way that we planned. On the revenue side, I got lost. And you do break out revenues a little later on in this report. That's a little more along the lines of how we plan it. But you have selected revenues. I guess I like that view better, but the problem is it doesn't add up to our expenses. So we're missing some pretty big buckets there.
Right. The item below that one on page 8, there's 2 sections. The bottom section hopefully does tie out to the town's portion. It doesn't include school, but that
Okay.
43,150,000 is the town's budget.
Again, John, these selected revenues and this view, if you will, was a product of prior finance committee's desire, if you will. And
Right. I could change it so that this shows the department's total revenues if you'd like.
Now, I don't know. I think what might help is if I understood a little better what level of detail you plan at, and you already have it at today, and then how it's currently grouped. I think, and maybe it'll make a little more sense, or I'll be able to explain it. I don't know if you have that, or if it's easy to export.
Well, I guess the point of these reports is to give the high level view. I mean, there's a lot of detail that goes behind these, which, if you want that detail, I can provide it as well. But we're trying to keep the council or finance committee at the higher level. So I can do it however you would like.
Well, is on page 8, the property taxes estimated at 21 and we've collected 7. So I guess that one was a little confusing.
Yeah, and I
We
think
collected 70 and we estimated 21. So I don't think we estimated 21. So
well, the 21 is just the town's portion again, and the 70
I gotcha.
is everything collected. Normally what I do in these reports is I break out how much is school, how much is town, how much was allocated to the special revenues, if anything, how much is allocated to the capital projects, if anything, and food services. And timing just hasn't allowed us to do that yet, as well as trying to finish up some of the budget pieces. So
Right.
at some point, hopefully before your next report, that will all be in line.
And do we ever get an update on food services? I noticed it was kind of left out. I would assume that it's the most changed out of, because it's always its own separate bucket.
Right, if you looked at page 6,
Okay.
there are 4 little sections, if you will. This other school fund expenditures, the second section of numbers. If you looked at Fund 7600, those are food service expenditures.
Okay.
Nutrition, and then the second bucket, the 4th bucket, if you will, shows other school fund revenues. And again, if you looked at the Fund 7600, those show the revenues, which there don't look like there are a lot of those, but
So they're 61% spent, but they've only collected 12% revenue.
correct.
well, and a big part of that is obviously in-school sales of lunches. I do think you'll see some strange occurrence here, as I recall through the entire COVID period. DOE, and maybe it's from the federal directive, have been directed to continue providing food service throughout. And I think there's some federal support, CARES Act money to help support that effort.
Okay, so
Probably-
these are meals we're delivering?
I don't
Then,
know. I think there's some delivery. There's certainly a pickup option as well.
Pickup,
I must
okay.
admit, I don't know all the particulars, but
okay. Yeah, hopefully maybe there is some offset money there.
I
Okay.
believe there is. I know that's been a very clear directive throughout this entire period that school nutrition or school food service continue uninterrupted.
Right, yeah, which makes sense. And I mean, it's always a big hit on the budget anyway, because we don't collect nearly what it costs to run the program to start with. So any additional revenue, if there's programming that can provide it, that would be great.
Well, the good news is over the last 3 or 4 years, we're actually budgeting appropriately. To be honest, we historically, or they chronically under budgeted that. It always ran a deficit. And I think we finally made that correction and are more accurately
Yeah, to portray it right. Yeah,
portraying
that's
that
good.
through the budget process and approval.
Yeah, that's really good. That's important.
And I guess the only other thing I would add is if anyone has any ideas on what they would like to see on these reports that maybe isn't showing or isn't clear enough, then, just let me know or let Tom know, or if you want to sit down, John or Betsy or somebody and John, other John, and we can meet up here in the finance conference room and discuss maybe what you would like to see.
Yeah, we're
Yeah,
going
that'd
to
be
hit this
nice.
with our goals, but I think this is going to be a good starting point for us for in terms of a standard report that we can get out that's people can be somewhat familiar with. I just need to understand it a little better. And yeah, I guess, and it's mostly on the revenue side, like intergovernmental revenues, charge for services, miscellaneous revenues. It's not intuitive to me what those might encompass or how we might get from the planning view of the world to this view.
Mhm.
I think it'd be the next page.
I think Tom, I went through the budget line item in detail with Larissa, and I think in that, some of those are broken out of what we're expecting to get where. Do I have that
Well,
accurate?
I think the challenge that we have here, and Ruth, tell me if I'm wrong here, but those different categories under general fund, what we're looking at right at the top of the page, those are groupings that come from the CAFR or from the audit.
Yes.
And those don't necessarily match with the vernacular we use through the budget process.
Right, that's normal. I think.
Right. And so I think therein is the disconnect, John, that it's
Yeah.
hard to tie the two together because they're the same numbers, but they're different combinations of numbers, right?
And then on page 8, if you'd like, we could expand that bottom section out a little bit more so that it does show, right now it's just showing the estimated revenue and actuals. And it's pretty much by department, except we do break out fund balance from the executive budget and we break out property taxes from the finance budget. But I could probably do something similar to that and have like school and food services or something else below it if you'd like. I mean, just think about that and
That might be it. That might be the, with your normal general fund, and then that might get us there or get us close.
So Tom, what do you look at when I know you keep a close eye on it to see, what might need adjustment. What do you look at?
I'm more interested in, I admittedly a big picture guy. I've got a pretty good sense of the watch areas, and I really try to pay attention specifically at those areas. Frankly, I task my department heads to be managing their budgets and coming to me when there's trouble spots. So I'm not being naive, but I have great trust and respect in my department heads to do their job and to seek help when they need it. Having said that, I'm not blind to it, but I'm not paying daily attention to it either.
So Ruth, what do they normally look at? Or do they come to you, or do you go to them and say, maybe you've got, you're kind of behind on this or you've had on that? How did they kind of keep an eye on how their budget's going?
A long time ago, prior to this current software, we had to, they had no access, so we would have to provide them with reports and things. With this software, they are able to go on and run their own reports. They can see what they're doing or how they're doing. usually once or twice a year, I'll sit down and say something like, oh, gee, Public Works, Mike, you got $1.5 million estimated revenues, but you've only collected 300,000, have we posted something incorrectly? Is there some other issue? And, we'll kind of discuss it as we go.
Okay, great.
I
Thank you.
think the proof's in the pudding. I'm really pleased and proud of kind of the budget performance we've been able to deliver consistently. We are consistently staying within our means. And again, I'm proud of the fact that we haven't had to come forward with a budget amendment. Maybe that's a bit of luck, probably it is. But I think it also has to do with good sound management at the department level.
I think you've got it. I'm trying to draw or help draw the connection to the planning process. And that I think just makes it a little easier to communicate to the public where we are relative to plan. And then when you go look at the plan again the next year, I think it makes that process go a little smoother.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think we're far off in terms of format. And I don't know that it would change anything, the way you manage it at all.
Okay.
It's just, I think that layer that I perceive the council is looking for us to try to put on top of it to help us communicate to the public and to the council a little bit better. Any other questions on the quarterly report?
I don't have any questions, but I do want to take Ruth, you up on your offer to maybe sit down in more detail with you on this, since it's my first time kind of seeing it. And I think there's a lot of contextual things that others have that I don't, that'll help me think a little bit more about, what are the questions I would have and how do I answer that with this material? And then again, that might even lead to kind of some simple changes or things. But what is the way we want to kind of work through that, John? Like, how do we want to kind of collaborate to, like Tom opened with, think through what are the things we want to look at and what we think the other council might want to understand? And is this meeting the need right now, or are there some modifications or things? Because I find the narrative to be really helpful and this discussion to be helpful. So how do we make sure we're capturing more of that as part of this?
And it's probably a good segue because, we have this other format we talked about with the budget, the budget tax rate sheet. So anyway, I assume we're kind of get to that. That was, what I was thinking.
I see all these things as being interrelated, right? I want to try to, I don't want to go down a million different paths. I feel like we've got some general objectives that we'll jump into in a minute, but we want to focus on long-term planning, on more consistent reporting to the council and the public. Those were goals that were given to us and that we agreed that we thought should do. And then we need to come up with budget targets as well. But I think as we go through this, I'm hoping that the format will become more clear, or that will at least be one of the to-dos, is to let's hone in. I don't think we want to make things more detailed necessarily. I think we want to simplify. And sometimes you have to get into the details to be able to do that effectively. So I think with that, we can move on to the next item for discussion, which is to set the Finance Committee goals for 2021. And Tom added this to the packet, where there's 2 goals that came out of our town council level workshop that pretty specifically related to the Finance Committee and the work that we'll do. So I'm pretty good with the way these read. I don't know if you guys have any comments or suggestions for how we might modify them before we vote as a council on them.
Incidentally, these are scheduled for action with the council on February 3rd.
So the first one around finances, I'm fine with it. I guess it's a question, and it might just be a nuance for when we think about the standard format and finance. Like part of our ability to kind of assess the finances is to also understand the performance, and are things still going well? So like we're seeing that, we're at 50% in terms of expenditures generally across the board. Are we still able to deliver the services at that level, or, just like other aspects of, other quantitative aspects that we might want to understand? Do we think that this needs to incorporate that, or is it strictly just to be looking at the numbers?
It strikes me the way this is worded, I think it's up to the Finance Committee to determine that format and timing. I can tell you historically, with good consistency, Peter Hayes, as the longtime chairman of this committee, would report out during committee reports at council meetings, at least on a quarterly basis, and provide these very pages to members of council. And so you could argue and take it that simply, that you simply regurgitate what you deal with as a committee at one of the council meetings, or you could even schedule a special workshop if you wished, but it seems to be most efficient to use it, to have John perhaps as the chair report out on a quarterly basis. And staff is pleased to help as well.
Yeah, and the other thing I'm kind of thinking through, John, I think it reads fine as far as a goal, but your financial picture is a result, right? It's something that's already happened in the past for the most part. It doesn't necessarily tell you what's coming or what's happening. Is there a way to kind of blend in some of that forward-looking metrics or information with how we look at things? And I think we can take small steps in that direction, maybe.
And that might be to the other comment I made earlier, as we kind of think through the reports that Ruth provides, is there something we would want to add that gives us that, so that we can do, Tom, like you said,
right,
have it all ready here, review it, and then John can deliver some of the key things at the council meeting, if that's kind of the direction we want to go into.
One thing you could do is, I know they've kind of put this in front of the finance committee, but I think it's certainly appropriate for you to task your colleagues on council. Is there something in particular you'd like us to be focused on? They may not have anything, but I think they'd be pleased to be asked, I suppose.
Fair enough. I'll take that one away. I think that's a good suggestion, Tom. The second goal, where we agree to set targets. This is so I guess it's not that complicated, right? So we traditionally do a ground up budgeting process where things are brought to us as a council that have been built up from a detail level. And that's kind of balanced with our 3% mill rate target, but we don't usually get more or much more detailed than that. The way I'm reading this is we want to be a little more granular with that 3% at the top of the budget. And at a minimum, either split it between a goal for the town or in schools, or maybe even by department. I don't know if you guys have given this one much thought in terms of practice. I've talked to Sarah Layden from the school board as well about it. And, I think from their perspective, they're looking for guidance on what the number should be. But at the same time, they're also looking to bring forward for public consumption what the needs are from the school department. So what I've been trying to think through is how do we allow both of those to happen without the process kind of getting thrown out of whack?
Just if I could provide some history to the sub-bullet. Historically, I mean, this 3% goal has been around for a decade or better, frankly, fairly close to what, to that same wording, actually. Inevitably, what's happened is that the school and the town, to some extent, when the budget process begins upon the presentation of the budget, we're far from that goal, and no one should be surprised by that, right? And historically, there's been criticism of the school board that their budget is at whatever it is, 6, 7, 8%, whatever it is as a starting point. And as a way to help alleviate some of that criticism and add some clarity, there's been work in the last couple of years to add a first reading target, so as to have everyone have mutual expectations and appreciate that they're going to start somewhere, but ultimately we want to end at 3% or less tax rate. And of course, the tax rate involves all the factors, revenue, valuation increases and such. And so I guess the final point I'd make is that first reading budget goal done right, I think really should focus on gross expenditures, the things we have control over.
I think I think you're spot on, Tom. And I think a part of it might be just the way that we communicate the initial budget presentation. Right now, we kind of all hone in on the mill rate that is the result of a process that hasn't been completed yet. Instead of these are our target spending. And this is the gap that we need to close before we get to the end of the process.
Right. I should also mention, I could probably dig it out. We did do an analysis to help help this discussion along. We probably look back 10 years at starting point, first reading starting points for both town and school, and where we ended up, so on and so forth. So part of this goal is that if we start correctly, and then we perform from a valuation increase point of view, as we do typically, we're going to end correctly. Does that make sense? So that analysis helped inform. Now, it doesn't take into account what future needs are, and there might be unique and extreme needs, and that's a fair point. But on average, I think there is a way to look to the history to help inform the future.
Yeah, and
So
I think you
my-
can't totally ignore the revenue side because it is a part of the picture. And especially this year on the school side, I totally agree with, looking at the expenditure side and, saying, maybe it's a 5% expenditure, goal that the schools are looking for. I mean, I think, unfortunately, however it gets there, it would be helpful if they could bring to the table, what their salary drivers are that are in their contracts, what that's going to drive up their expenditures without any change. I know they do what they call the level set budget. I'm not as interested in that as I am in their, the things that absolutely cannot change in terms of their salaries, because that's their big cost driver. But I think this year in particular, as it was last year, we would want them to bring to the table to some extent, the reserves they think they'll be able to apply, because it's looking like, at least on these initial reports that we saw, that they're going to have some cost savings. They certainly got a lot more grants than they were expecting. I think we all expected they would get some grants, but we had no idea how much. So the town, as the taxpayers, funded, the COVID relief, and then they were able to have, the governor announced more money coming the schools' way, the governor and the federal government. So I think this is going to be a messy year, and I think that those revenues on their side is definitely going to be important for us to understand, when we're looking at some level of a target. That's my opinion, but I do think focusing on a budget, once we understand on both sides, what are the drivers that absolutely cannot be changed. So especially on wages, because that's the majority of both budgets.
Yeah, but you can move the FTE. So and all the numbers can be managed. John, I'm sorry, go ahead. You've been waiting.
No, I was just going to say, like, I struggle with this one in terms of trying to set goals for the first reading, because I think it's important we give everybody the opportunity to kind of say, here's what we need, that we think we need to deliver, the services we want to provide both at the town and at the school level. But what I would like to understand come the first reading is really how they're prioritizing those. And like to Betsy and John's point, I think, there are some things that we have to do because we're contractually obligated. So that is what it is. And, I think that's going to happen. But where there's like more discretionary decisions where we think we want to do something and we're at for those funds, I'd rather like understand that list in totality and then have them provide some degree of prioritization to say, whatever, if we get to 8% or 10% or whatever it is, this is how we're prioritizing those investments, so that if we do need to pull back, they've already kind of done some of the work to say, well, the stuff at the bottom is just going to have to go if that's what it's going to take to kind of get us where we need to for the end goal. So that's kind of like the way I look at it and my preference, because like I want to hear from folks what they think they need to be successful, and then through the process work through to get it to what we can afford.
Yeah, just if I could jump on my soapbox for a second, the way I view the way the charter is organized, and I've had the same experience in other communities. I think very purposely the charter tasks myself and the Board of Education with preparing and proposing a budget. And I think that division, that responsibility is singular for a purpose. It is, as John Anderson suggests, my job as regards budget is to tell you what, in my professional opinion, we need to run the operations of the town. And on the school side, much the same. BOE is single focused, right? Their purpose is public education, period. No other priorities. So it's important that we don't necessarily hamstring the manager or the Board of Education for being clear what the needs are. Whether that matches with the practical abilities or the politics of the situation, I won't say is immaterial, and I don't mean to be totally, head in the clouds here, but there's something to be said for making sure that we have those conversations. Now, if you ask most of my senior staff, they would say that I use the red pen too liberally before you ever see it. A lot of things don't ever get to the council, and I often feel bad about that. Whereas my experience on the school side, I think they're not shy about stating their needs and fighting hard for them. And it doesn't feel good because we often end up with a short end of the stick, I feel, at the end of the day. But that's just the way the process goes often.
So, yeah, I'm glad you said that, Tom, because I've been reading the charter as well, you might notice that there's a 10-day gap. So the school board is supposed to deliver to the council their budget 10 days before you. And I think that was probably intentional in that they built some time in to try to distill what might be coming down the pipe from the schools. But then the other piece of it is, I wonder if this is potentially in conflict with the charter, is to direct first reading targets. It's interesting. It kind of just popped in my head as you were talking, but you're correct in that it does read that you bring the budget forward.
Yeah, and the other probably best demonstration of the importance of that budget is what happens if the council does not act, whether it wishes not to or can't. And it is that my proposed budget and the BOE's proposed budget is what goes into effect until the council says otherwise. I just think that underscores the importance in this separation of process. Now, once I deliver the budget to you, it's yours to do what you will with it. That's why the budget review, the 6 weeks or 8 weeks you take, is so critical. And then you hand it back to me and say, Mr. Manager, now manage within these limits. School board, here's your bottom line. Good luck.
So it's really the targets that we come up with could be as much about informing the council's expectations as anything else, and not necessarily a directive to the town or the school about what to come forward with. And I'm going to give this some more thought, but I think I might see a way that we might be able to do it and respect what's in the charter and level set how we're coming into the process as the ones that need to, make the ultimate decision on how much we're going to spend and ask the taxpayers for.
Yeah, I do feel we're trapped by the first and second read, the way that we do it. In some other work that I've done, the school board comes forward with what I'll call the pie in the sky, request, which is what, John, you're talking about. And, maybe some exciting new programs that the community wants to support. But that's all goes through, a different avenue where they start to pare those down and get feedback from the community, working towards a budget goal. And we seem to do that at first read, which is alarming to the community and causes too much heartache, in my opinion, and then puts us on this path to very quickly resolve all that with everybody yelling. I had proposed a pretty detailed, not super detailed, but, proposal, for a budget advisory committee for the school board, where that process starts very early, and you do put in the pie in the sky things, and that's not, maybe that's not even fair, but the exciting, innovative opportunities, where I had done some work before, it was a Chinese program, and how that all would work. And the community got to weigh in on that. And actually believe, the community wanted it. So I don't feel like the process works well at all. I haven't restudied this like you did, John, in terms of the I shouldn't say that. It gets us to a bottom line eventually, but it feels like you're saying, JA, that it becomes contentious, and then things that maybe people would be excited and interested in doing just don't even make the red pen, between the first read, the second read. It's a good time that we're looking at the charter, I think, in terms of thinking of this. But I do wish that the BOE was able to put that out there on their own and then bring us a more reasonable first read budget that's already been vetted by the community. And I'm not saying they don't do that, but it feels like it doesn't get vetted by the community until it hits first read, and then we start vetting it.
I guess the question I have for us is like, what is the problem we're trying to solve at first reading? Like, is it
Confusion.
You listed some concerns, and I feel like maybe there's others, but I that's where I'm not sure, like, what is it that we're trying to address with that second sub-bullet? And is that second sub-bullet really the solution?
In my opinion, it was designed to address an unfortunate circumstance that's happened fairly consistently, which is when the council simply sets a 3% end goal, and the school, let's say, starts with an initial request that showed gross expenditure increases of 6% or 7 or 8, whatever it might be. There were members of council in the community that would go crazy, that the school is just not listening, they're not following the directive, and it started the process on this really contentious note. And so this was designed to say, no, we need to be realistic, that we're going to start somewhere else, and we're going to help give some framework around that. And at the end of our process, we're going to get to this point. And so I think it did in part help alleviate some of that contention. Yeah. I would note, interestingly, Chairman Johnson has said quite emphatically a couple of times recently, I think publicly, that he thinks that there's too much collaboration with the BOE, that we should kind of do our thing and meet, start together and then end together, but not so much collaborate in the middle. And I don't want to speak for him, but
well, I've had that discussion too. We have different roles. So yes, we have to work together, but we each have our own jobs to do, is the way I kind of look at it. And they intersect, absolutely. But if we were a lockstep, we wouldn't necessarily each be fulfilling our duties, I don't think.
Well, I mean, it sounds like, though, too, like one of the things I feel like I'm hearing from this group is that, and Betsy, to use your words, like pie in the sky, we're kind of making an assumption and judgment that what they're doing isn't what Tom's doing, in terms of like really trying to redline and get crisp and bring something forward, which I'm not sure if I agree with that or think that's the case, because I do think that they are trying to put forward what they think is the right thing. I'm sure there are things that come out through their process too that we just maybe don't have visibility to. Mm-hmm. So again, like, is that the problem? Is that the concern? Is it really that we feel like the BOE is offering something greater than the starting point we would like them to get to? And is the solution, again, not setting a specific budget goal, but maybe, Betsy, some of your recommendations of like needing to do more process things or suggesting process things to them to do to kind of have a different starting point?
Well, I do think that a budget target for them to bring to us at first read makes the most sense to try to accomplish that. And it's, if we could, I want to look at the calendar, and maybe it's all calendar driven, but if we did that at the right time, I think that they would welcome that, and they would bring that to the first read. And then, we would work from there as we work through, the revenues and things like that. So, we don't dictate their process and what they're doing. And you're right. I mean, it's a perception, how realistic it is, of what they bring forward. And is it, I think it just, at some point they kind of bring, well, we want to do this, and you look at the numbers historically and you'll see, well, this is up 150%, this is up, 20%, this is up 30%. So, just to Tom's point, I really think that, he's got a budget goal in mind for the town that he brings to the first read, and then kind of lays some things out for us to say, hey, we can't get to the 3%, and here's the things I'm thinking that, maybe we could push out or something
Mhm.
like that. So I guess I would more like to see them do something similar to that with a budget target for first
Yeah.
read.
I think
Well,
this is going
I'm
to be.
just,
Go ahead.
so I would just say, like, I'm just wondering if like a solution could be like, again, just thinking out loud, like say last year they came in at a 10% increase. Like this is where I would kind of like to see, again, kind of what I said at the beginning. Okay, you have all of these new investments you want to make that get that 10%, but show us what it would be at the 8%, at the 4%, at the 0%, just to kind of help show us, again, a better view of like what's going to likely have to be sacrificed if choices need to be made to lower you from that 10% down to a certain number to get to the 3% mill rate. Like that's where, do we need to set a goal, or do we need to just have them deliver something that helps us better see and understand, like, well, they need a 10% increase, that's what they think, but the choices that they would make to kind of cut this from 10 to 8 to 6, what those would look like.
John, the challenge I've seen with that exercise, it makes intuitive sense, is that the sorts of things, and I'm not suggesting that they choose things that are controversial, but they understandably will look to protect classroom, right? And so they're looking for extracurriculars, fee, revenue generation through user fees, none of which are popular. And so all of a sudden, those conversations, when you look at what the options are, get further contentious. So it makes sense what you're suggesting. It doesn't typically flow well.
And I think everybody's kind of trying to avoid that this year,
Right.
because you're right. It turns it political very fast. You're trying to, when really, I think it should be about trying to make sure that we're being equitable across departments, and that we're funding appropriately, and that we're also doing our service to the taxpayer, and that we're not, jacking the taxes up an unfair amount.
Yeah, it's not perfect, but I'll go back to what I said earlier, that I think giving some first reading targets is the best way to assure ultimate success. Now, when I say targets, they ought to be realistic, and they ought to build in flexibility for new investments, frankly, so as not to stifle, a good conversation. And history is not always a great predictor of future need, obviously, but it's an indicator. And that exercise we did before did produce some numbers based on historical performance. And I know John has done some further analysis and takes some exception to those prior numbers. But I think there's value in that exercise in establishing first reading targets.
Yeah, and I think ultimately, it's up to them to make the choices. And should they decide not to, and we can't come to agreement, it comes back to this committee, and we do take a line item and say, we're not going to fund this particular investment, because ultimately it's up to this committee to send forward to the council our recommendations. I, being in this position for the second year, I don't like being in that position, but it could come down to that. If we set targets and they really do not want to meet those targets, that they will come back and say, we're not meeting that target. We don't feel it's right. And then, it becomes up to this committee to kind of do a little more of that analysis that you're talking about, John. And it's imperfect. I mean, the best way to do it is to watch their meetings and see their discussion and understand, what they're up against and what they're trying to fund, their finance committee meetings, because they do go through a ton of detail and a ton of questions. So I found that to be a big help, at least for making my own opinions, which ultimately, but I think we could put a fair effort in, at looking at revenues, asking a lot of questions so that we kind of come up with a target budget goal. I think they asked for that several times, give us a realistic budget goal. And they'll work it from there.
So what I'm hearing that we all agree with at least these two goals, and we're pretty much okay with them going forward to the council vote. And then I think the next layer on that is how are we going to meet them? And I think the targets is pretty pressing because the budget process is already well underway. Looking at the proposed calendar, I sense that we can probably wait until our next meeting and have that be the primary focus, but I'm not sure. I'm wondering if we need to have one in between then, a workshop to go over it. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Tom.
Well, I can tell you from my perspective, my department budgets are due to me by February 26th. And then I have the month of March essentially to assemble it all. So
when would you want those targets?
Ideally, I'd like to be able to give early guidance to my department heads so they can be mindful of that. Failing that, so long as I have them, you know, in advance of submitting the budget, I don't know enough about the school's timeline. I mean, the expectation is for them to get their budget to me probably 10 days or so before the presentation.
Okay.
And essentially, I do not see my role. I don't influence their budget requests whatsoever. Colette works hard to collaborate with Kate to incorporate their request into the overall budget document. We don't exert influence. That's not our role.
What I'm hearing is that February, we might need to try to have an earlier meeting.
That's what I'm hearing.
Yes.
Yeah, like
If we can do it
February 10th.
specific to that issue, yes.
And we'll have a workshop on budget targets. And I think we might approach it in two ways, Tom. I know that staff's done some work, and I've done some work. I have some experience with this type of thing. Maybe we both come to the table and compare notes and have a discussion and hopefully leave that meeting with, again, these aren't necessarily directives for you have to come back with this budget, but this is going in, this is what we would expect you to come back with to end with the result that we're trying to come up with. So if you have a really good reason to deviate, you should, and you should support it.
And the real key to this is that those initial first reading targets, and if I'm asked to provide some guidance here, I'll be focusing on expenditure only, not on net.
I like that.
Gross budget.
Yeah.
Those numbers need to be flexible. They can't be so constrained that things start contentious, that they're not reasonable, that we can't meet them out of the gate. So it needs to look at inflationary factors, plus the ability for some new investment. And so that's the analysis that I'm prepared to bring forward to you.
It may be a bit of a range, Tom, in that where, the law of averages, things should even out in a perfect world. But I think what would happen is everybody would come in at the higher end of the range.
Yep.
So this is a little, JC, this is a little bit of a difference on the goal. And I'm not saying that we change this or whatever, but do we want to do this in collaboration? Because it's always feels like we can't do the first thing because we haven't done the first thing. That's the way the whole budget process always feels. Well, we can't know this until we know that. We can't do this. So, I mean, if we're talking about a workshop, do we need the phrase in collaboration with the Board of Education? I mean, last year, and I think they struggled with the first year that we did it too. I mean, last year they just said, tell us a number, tell us a number, tell us a number. So I'm only putting that out there. I'm not proposing that, but we were talking about the draft. I mean, is it that we strived, for the 3% and establish, first and second readings for the school and the town, and we do that, and then, meet with them after, or, what's the collaboration in that? Is that, or can we leave the collaboration in, and that's like Tom and Ruth and Kate kind of pulling data together to help us figure that out? I mean,
so maybe I could take a stab at rephrasing the second bullet: establish specific first reading budget targets by department. And I think it goes without saying that everybody has input into that process, but I would be hesitant to have a workshop right now that expands the circle much more than this group, because I don't think it'd be all that productive.
Yeah.
I think once we get to a given, a certain place where we're reasonably comfortable, then we expand the circle. So maybe that wasn't a great rephrase of the goal.
So I have two questions, maybe. So maybe specific to this conversation about changing the language, like, again, are we, the reason there needs to be some language in there, in my opinion, and maybe it can be changed, is that I'm assuming somebody needs to inform us with some sort of information to set an informed budget goal. And so, Betsy, you mentioned a few names. Is Kate, is she the Ruth's partner over on the school side? So I think it's just making sure that we have the right people, and maybe it's not the school board or the Board of Education, but it's the I don't know what the word is, but like I would be comfortable having Ruth, Tom, and Kate, and Sandy, I guess, on the school side to help provide informed information for us to make that recommendation for what those budget goals should be.
Yeah, I think I'm reacting to something that's not here. So that's something I did kind of incorrectly because did it become a policy, Tom? The Joint Finance Committee was originally the ones that were tasked with coming up with this specific first reading budget goals. And
Yeah,
I think that was a real challenge. To John's point, I think it would be very difficult to expand this past our group right now.
No, it was never a formal policy. It was an outgrowth of the One Town, One Budget. It was kind of a continuation or extension of that effort. Past finance committees, did have regular joint meetings to some limited success, I'll say. Good effort, but it didn't produce much. And I think that's to Councilor or Chairman Johnson's point. There's a lot of effort put together in collaboration that doesn't produce much results.
So how about this? I think we can meet it the way that it's worded. I'll reach out to Sarah and ask her, we're going to have this workshop on the 10th. Is there any documents or support or recommendation from your group that you'd like us to consider or to help inform the decision? I think that's probably not a bad way to start. Okay.
That's good. My other question, Tom, was for you, for something you said earlier, just so that I understand. You said to only focus on expenditures only versus the gross budget. Can you explain the differences between those two things for me?
No, they're really interchangeable in that context. It's really, and the difference is I have the ability to have non-property tax revenues. So it's a way of equalizing the charge to both town and school. It's those things that we have theoretically control over.
What you're going to spend.
What you're going to spend.
And the difference is you got, on the revenue side, you have some funding from the state that comes to both the town and the school. You've got property taxes, community services charges. There's a whole layer of items for how we collect money. About 2/3 comes from property taxes. But I think what Tom's suggesting is let's just focus on this is what we think we need to spend. And then as we move through the process, we'll hone in on this is how much we think we're going to collect. And that actually, it becomes a little circular in that, I have more money than I thought I had, or I have less. You have to make some adjustments to what you're spending as you go on.
Yeah, if you can control the spending side of the equation, it really sets you up for the ultimate success.
Okay, okay, I understand now. That sounds
And
good.
again, so long as that those initial targets are not artificially low, such that they are constraining, not even taking into account contractual obligations and inflationary factors, much less new investment. They need to consider some flexibility.
JC, could I suggest one more homework in that, if we have specific data we think would be helpful, that we mail it to Tom and Ruth, and they can maybe figure out how to bring that to the meeting so that we would be able to have that data there that we think might be helpful.
Absolutely.
And if it's a school thing, then Ruth could reach out to the school. I don't want to mail anything directly to Kate or the school, but I feel like we can use Tom and Ruth as the conduits to get some of that information that we're interested in.
If you have specifics or questions, I think that's fair game. Just include the group, or at a minimum, include me on it so I understand.
Yeah, I'll include the group.
Coming back and forth. Okay, good. So do we want to add any other goals, or are we had talked about the long-term planning, which I think we're going to work on anyways as a committee. But do you want to, is that a goal you want to bring to the council, or just leave this as is?
I'd say Lord, no, but.
Okay. All right, so I'm good with this. We can move on.
Remember the old adage, under promise and over deliver.
There we go. I like that.
I mean, there's things, that will pop up, we talked about affordable housing, TIF, CEA policy, there's so many things on the plate that, we might want to focus our attention on, but, as budget season starts, we got to 100% focus on that. And then maybe we can get a lot of good work done and start, reevaluate or something for the summer.
Perfect. So the next item on the agenda was the staff has provided a proposed budget adoption schedule. I don't know if you guys have had a chance to review it or if you have thoughts, but I wanted to at least bring it forward and get us to start thinking about it. And I think this is based on how we've done things in the past, with the exception that some of the community outreach meetings are not included because those will probably be difficult this year. But I don't know if you want to give an intro to this, Tom.
Yeah, as you say, this is very similar to the path we followed in the past. Much of this is dictated by charter in terms of, once I present budget, the clock starts ticking. And of course, we do work backward from the June primary. So when you factor all those constraints together, it does produce a fairly consistent budget schedule. Having said that, there is flexibility for this committee, who's tasked with typically doing the detailed budget review, as to how you want to conduct that. And so, Colette has gone ahead and scheduled, suggested some things through the month of April and early May, which is really the meat of the Finance Committee's review process. There certainly are other ways that you could tackle that. You could tell us which departments you really want to spend time with, quality time with, and really focus your attention, as opposed to, in the past, we've actually scheduled every single department a brief moment in front of Finance Committee. And sometimes that's valuable. There's at least education that occurs, if not budget changes, but it's a matter of how you wish to handle the review process. And we don't need to decide that tonight. I think the schedule for adoption is really predicated on when we start and when we finish. And there's not much latitude there, in my opinion.
So I had a couple of comments or thoughts that I'll toss out there, with the understanding that this will be somewhat of a living document as we start to go forward. We've traditionally handled capital improvement projects and capital equipment in the department reviews. And I think that's appropriate, but it's also a key balancing item at the end of the process, determining what we're going to bond versus pay for from property taxes. And I thought that at that last meeting that you're right now, or listed TBD April 29th, it might be a good time to talk about debt and capital equipment or expenditures overall. And because that's really when we need to start making some of the final decisions for whatever recommendations we might have.
Would you be open to at least hearing from departments as they appear before you, just to make their presentation? But you're saying just reserve time to make sure we circle back to and have that global discussion.
As a finance committee, yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense for the departments to include any capital requests in their presentation or time slot. I just want a little time for the finance committee to process it at a macro level instead of at a department level.
You're right. Typically, that's not done until second reading in front of the council.
Yeah, and it's an important thing when you're trying to hit a mill rate target, right? Because that's one of the tools that you can use or not use. I just want to be deliberate about it.
Right. You're right. There's some discretion. We can further defer items, and often that's, we find ourselves going back there time and time again.
Other than that, I'll throw out the first meeting that you had on the 14th. I scribbled down community services, public works, and executive. I'm assuming that you cover planning and finance and everything with, even though there's a separate budget for those, or is that not typically the case?
Yeah, that's not quite true. Contained under executive would be kind of all the facilities, human resources, general assistance, town clerk.
Okay. And then would you typically have like finance and planning MIS come for their budget proposals?
It really is up to your wishes. One thing you could do is we'll be flexible on our side. You may want to receive the budget book, maybe schedule the first one out, receive
Yeah.
the budget book, get some familiarity. If you've got a department or two that you really want to spend some time with, we can fill the gaps in once you have the book in hand.
Yeah, okay. So I guess that's some
I like
homework for us, give some thought to who you want to hear from on the 14th.
Okay.
And we can try to lock in the other dates once we know what we're looking at.
And again, we're proposing, just because history, they've typically done this, kind of weekly meetings, and to stay on Wednesdays for those meetings.
I don't foresee that being an issue for me.
We're skipping a week there. I suppose, Colette, that's because it's council meeting week.
That's correct, Tom.
21st. So
Yes.
there could be another meeting we squeeze in the week of the 19th or whatever it is.
That might be school vacation week too, if I'm not mistaken.
The town isn't off.
Yeah. But our kids are.
I'm
No,
sorry,
fair enough.
why are we doing Wednesdays?
That's been our regular meetings. And so we're staying with Wednesdays to try and be consistent. We're just going to do them more regular.
But Betsy, we'll work to your needs. I mean, this needs to work for you.
Is
Oh.
there a conflict?
No, it becomes a lot, with council meetings on Wednesday and stuff like that, but,
Well, these dates don't double up on any council night, but
right, I just mean having it every week as opposed
Yeah.
to having some weeks off, but that's all right. It's
Well,
doable,
it's actually only 2 or 3 days of meetings,
right?
specific finance committee meetings anyways.
So, I mean, what's not here, because we just talked about it, is I think we had a lot of conversation about, kind of backing this up. So if what would be our expectation on April 14th, from the school board? If we're able to give them budget targets, would we be wanting to see a budget that meets kind of the first read target? Is that where we're headed with this?
I view them as distinct. So we're going to provide targets and they're going to bring the budget forward. And I think that at a minimum, we're balancing the force. Ideally, it would come in at target, but they know things that we don't know, right?
Right. So whether they do or don't, I guess, do we want to make sure that we're giving them enough time to come in at that first read target for that particular April 14th meeting? And if we do, is this something the council needs to pass, or is this just going to be guidance from us that comes out of that workshop? So I guess I'm getting into the nitty gritty about when we provide it, and if they're supposed to show up April 14th, have we given them enough time?
So first reading's on the 7th of April. So they're going to have already presented their
Oh,
budget.
right. Sorry, the 7th, not the 14th.
Yeah, and we're going to have a more in-depth dive, more of a deep dive
Yeah,
on the 14th.
sorry, not the 14th, the 7th. Is that, are we trying to give them enough time to try to meet that budget goal? And
ideally, Betsy, they'd meet the goal or be aware of the goal before they submit the budget to me to include in the budget document. So it's weeks before that. That's
Right.
why it's important for, I guess, the workshop to be held in 10 days or, in a
Right.
couple of weeks, so we can give early guidance in that regard.
So if we
I think-
do that and we give the early guidance, does it have to go to council, or is this just going to come strictly from us?
Should go to council, but
Coun-
I don't know.
Council goal is written, really task the finance committee
You're right.
with determining what the first reading targets are.
You're right. So
So
I
we could come out of that workshop with those targets and presumably maybe even give them those targets by
Yeah.
February 10th. That would kind of be our goal. And then they would have all that time between February 10th and
Yep.
April 7th to know what the goal was.
Exactly. I think that's exactly the way it should work if you can swing it. If we can come out of that workshop with that guidance, that would be ideal.
I think that in itself would be a huge improvement, because I don't think we've been able to really get that in time. And again, it's like, what do we do first? But I think if we can do that and it doesn't need to go back to council, I think that that's ideal.
And I think if we can't get there on the 10th, assuming the 10th works, we should plan on a follow-up shortly thereafter. So it needs to be a focus for us.
I'm hopeful the analysis we bring to the discussion will help you kind of get there easier than you might think, but perhaps not. I think it is important to schedule a time for them, a good chunk of time for the school to make their presentation, just to provide the context that doesn't always come through in the line item budget proposal. You know, they do a pretty good job, very good job with their budget document and some narrative description, but I think having them present it is certainly an appropriate thing to make the effort for.
Okay. Good. Sounds like a good plan. Do we want to take a 3-minute recess and then jump into the next agenda item, which is the multi-year plan?
John, if I could, before you move off this, I don't know if I need a formal vote, but I would like to start circulating this with my staff and in the school and publicly, frankly. This is one of the first things we put on the budget portal, just so people can start to get a sense of what the cadence of budget process will be. So again, I don't feel as though there needs to be a formal action, but I just wanted you to be clear that if you're generally okay with this, we're going to move forward, start to circulate it.
So I guess I would like to add perhaps the date in there that we're, maybe a little extra time, but that we're going to provide the first read budget target as we circulate that. So we're talking the 10th, that we think we might have to do a little follow-up, but that, we provide the first read budget target by no later than February 17th.
I haven't had a lot of time to think about it, but I think that's probably appropriate, Betsy. I think that's a part of this year's process, and we want to make the public aware of it.
Then I think if we codify it in this document, then it gives everybody a heads up that we're working on that, we're accomplishing that goal, and then when we ask for people to get information, people will be like, oh, this is a real thing, and definitely. Let's get, like you said, you'd be reaching out to people, and Tom and Ruth would be putting together stuff. So, and if it works, where this becomes a less contentious process because we've kind of refined it a little bit, then it's something that could potentially be adopted, going forward. So I think it's worth putting it on the calendar myself.
I do think we need to set like a hard deadline, the 17th or whatever it is, and put it on here, like you said, Betsy, so that we make sure we can meet it. And hopefully, to your point, it drives, people to provide the information we need so that we can get to that date.
So maybe not the deliverable, but the meeting that we're going to coordinate. I don't know if the 10th works for everybody or logistically, but whatever that date is, I think that's what should probably come on here, so that if people want to provide feedback or comment, they can.
Yeah, establish first read budget target.
Yeah, finance committee meeting to establish budget targets.
Budget target. Yeah, I like that.
Do you have that, Colette?
Yes, I do. And would we still want to have a 4:00 meeting?
Yeah, Wednesday, February 10th, 4 p.m.
Yeah, I mean, Wednesday, the 10th, that's not vacation week, right? Either way.
I think it is actually. No, that's the next week. No, yes, that's the next week.
Yeah, I'm fine, the 10th at 4.
Okay.
John, there'll be an opportunity, 2 opportunities, presumably at the next council meeting. One, when the goals are being discussed, you could speak to this timeline, this process and timeline. You could, again, if you wish, you could present this budget schedule as part of your comments and committee reports as well.
I would like you to include it with the package if you can. I don't know if that's, or maybe I just put it on, I can't put it on people's desks, but.
Yeah, we typically don't for committee reports, but I'll make sure you have a clean copy and I'll be ready to share screen if we want to pull it up for everyone to see.
That'll work.
Okay.
Can I ask just a clarifying question? So did we just, so we talked about having a meeting on February 10th to set the first read budget goal, but then I heard a deadline of the 17th. Was that the intention, or do we think that the committee can issue that first read objective on the 10th? The only reason why, I mean, if we have department budgets due by the, Tom, I believe you said the 26th of February.
Yes.
it might be helpful to give as much lead time so that, first round departments can try to have that in mind. And if it's
I
the
think you're-
17th, that's less, it's a week and a half.
Yeah, let's target the 10th. And if for some reason we absolutely can't do it, we can address it then.
Yep.
I think our intention is going to be to leave that meeting with them being complete.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's a
Or
good
just a week. A week's a big deal when we're talking about
budget.
time. Yeah.
And I'll make availability on the 11th if we can't. I suspect we'll be able to.
Thank you.
Okay. Now we're good for a recess?
What is are we doing an in time or are we just?
So I don't anticipate going past 6.
Okay.
Has everybody had a chance to look through the long-term planning work that's been done in the past? We're going to be able to have a decent discussion on it? Or is it something that you feel we need to defer?
I definitely looked through it. And, I definitely looked through it. Decent discussion. I can't guarantee that. But
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I guess I want to try to cover it. So why don't we take a break until 5:30, which is like 3 minutes, and then we'll come back and I think we will have a hard stop at 6.
Okay, sounds good.
Sounds good.
Colette, you could turn your video off. I see you just lighting up my screen.
I don't know how to turn it off.
John, do you expect there'll be any time at all to at least talk about Finance Committee's role, if any, in the Avesta CEA request?
So I just jotted down 2 additional topics that I don't know how deep we'll be able to get into them, but one of them was the public safety building and then, or the development there. And then the other was growth management. And I think there's some financial impacts to what we do there that we need to be starting to get our arms around. So I just wanted to bring those up, and then I don't think we'll be able to get into them very deeply, but maybe make a plan for how we attack them. If we do.
So I didn't hear you mention the Avesta CEA.
That was the Avesta, yeah.
Okay.
I wrote it down as the public safety.
Oh, okay.
But yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Betsy, are you back on? Okay. So the next item on our agenda was to talk about the multi-year planning. Tom, I'll let you introduce this. I know there's actually what you shared a pretty long history to it, but it just I don't think it's been an acute focus for any committee for a little bit. So.
Yeah, fair enough. What I provided you, I kind of took the lazy way out, but you'll see just the date of this memo was August. I think it was one of Peter Hayes's kind of final finance committee meetings, and it was something that was involved with for probably, at least in discussion, for the entire time he was on finance. And his point was he didn't want to lose sight of the work that had been done. So this memo really tried to bring back up to speed and remind us all kind of the work that had been done prior, back particularly in 2018. And we appear to have landed on a kind of a format that made some sense, or at least the last finance committee. And Larissa really headed up this effort in large part. And there was behind this memo at the meeting in October of 2018, there was a PowerPoint that kind of brought the finance committee through, and there was good discussion around kind of the challenges of doing this sort of future look. In terms of assumptions that need to be made for it to be meaningful. And the end result of that was kind of focusing on a 3-year outlook rather than 5, really, so we could be a little more sure of those assumptions. And then a kind of a first pass at what that format or what the outlook would look like. And for lack of, well, not for lack of anything better, but really for familiarity with the tax rate comp sheet, we chose to use that format. And it's a bit clunky, but at least it's familiar. So I guess what I would be interested in is a couple of fundamental questions, whether this is an exercise that this committee wants to continue with first, and if so, is some of the prior work and decisions made by prior finance committees generally in the direction you'd like us to continue to pursue. You'll note behind, there's a memo, I think the last page, Liam, is kind of a narrative that accompanies, and there's a bunch of assumptions built into this. So, we need to do some updating for sure to kind of, to bring this up to current time. So I guess I'd ask for just a high level discussion, whether this is an exercise you think is helpful, and if so, are we headed in the right direction?
So from my perspective, it's something I would like to pursue.
Okay.
I don't think it's exactly there yet. And I have to confess, in August, when this came to us, I was underwater with work at the motel, and I didn't have time to give it the attention that it needed. So I think we had a brief discussion on it, but I wasn't fully prepared. I have watched all the videos now and reviewed the work somewhat in detail, and where I'm seeing some next steps relate to some of the goals that we have already talked about. in that we need to kind of define what our management level of detail is as a council, how we want to look at it. And the tax management sheet at the end there, it's probably not too far off, although I do think that the department view is an important one. And we certainly make some decisions that way as a way to prioritize service levels. So I'm not exactly sure how we're going to move it forward. I want to keep talking about it though.
Yeah.
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like the things, watching the old discussions and hearing stuff, like I felt like there was like a long-term strategic view of what we wanted to do, and then a short-term just try and make progress on it view, which I think is what we have on the screen right now. And just knowing we have so much on our plate, I guess the question is how do we start to chip away at that strategic view? And I really liked how, you know, they talked about how it's really, this financial plan needs to be integrated with our comprehensive plan, which is not going to be final until probably later this year, the CIP, the budget. And so I'm just trying to, like, in my own head, figure out how do we chip away at it, but what's the right time to start to do that so that it can come into effect at the right time where it's actually of some utility. And I just feel like this year, trying to figure that out and what is that plan might be enough of a lift and success without like trying to push to deliver something.
Yeah, I've been trying to figure out how to inch our way towards the right path. And I've been considering when we have the budget presentations, just having the department heads or Tom or the school talk about the horizon a little bit. I know we do it with our capital plan, but I think we can do it operationally to some extent as well. Just to give an inclination of, you know, are we pacing? I want to try to understand how our growth is pacing, right? Are we becoming more efficient in certain areas? So the value that's coming on board, is that really extra money that we have to allocate towards other needs or savings for the taxpayer? Or is it going the other way? Is the demand on services outpacing our growth in tax revenues? So go ahead, Tom.
I just wonder if there's another way. It's probably too simple and superficial, but as I think about demand on services, just kind of intertwined with the growth discussion, you know, we're in the people business. Our costs are people costs. And so I wonder if there's another way to get somewhere down this road and some look to the future in having detailed future staffing discussions on key departments.
I think that's a great idea.
And, you know, that work is largely either underway or done in most of the large departments. And that might shed some light for all of you in terms of what the future looks like and help inform the GMO discussion for that matter.
Yeah. I think it's what the future looks like is good. The one thing that struck me as like a really good point that I think Larissa made in the video, which I think is more complicated and maybe aligned with kind of what you're saying, Tom, but we have to kind of identify what some of the goals are around services that we want to be able to deliver and make sure that we kind of keep those top of mind as we do our financial planning. And I don't know what we have today that's kind of the starting point for that discussion to be able to say, and those are probably council discussions, right? Of like, where do we want to make choices about setting certain goals that the financial plan should be built around to make sure as we go through budget, we revisit those goals and the budget to make sure it's staying true to those or need to shift. Like I think this long-term plan will be a 3-year horizon, but it'll probably need to change every year based on, you know, the different, you know, goals and priorities of the council, which hopefully we can get to a point where there's like general alignment that they don't change that much. But I feel like that was kind of one of the things that I heard that I was like, that's a really good point. And I don't think we have that to really kind of set a long-term financial plan without kind of first aligning on what those goals are.
So when I looked at this, go ahead, Betsy, I'm sorry.
Sorry. And then is this something, you know, that we're kind of asking staff to just put out there or something we're trying to influence? And if we were trying to influence it, you know, to JA's point about goals, you know, I wonder if it almost has to be kind of a range as opposed to set numbers in the fact that, you know, growth and, you know, growth is going to greatly impact this. So, you know, growth impacts what services we need, growth impacts, you know, the revenue, the tax revenue we're bringing in, growth, you know, impacts the non-tax, not property tax, the non-property tax we're bringing in, you know, so would we want to, you know, put this in the framework of, you know, if we are at, you know, a 1% growth in terms of new building, if we're at a 2%, if we're at a negative, I mean, I don't know, because, you know, we know that, for example, with the fire department, you know, we've done an enormous amount of growth. And yet, you know, some of their expenditures have not really grown in terms of, we have a whole bunch of new housing units and the same size. So I guess I sometimes, you know, want to understand, you know, at what point do you need to grow? You know, at what point do the departments need to grow? How much can they absorb? And maybe, you know, obviously we can't totally know that, but it's a little bit difficult for me to think about this when we, you know, if we have unmitigated growth, this stuff is going to explode. If we go into recession and we're, you know, the economy is contracting, what does this look like? Do we want to take those factors into account and look at almost like scenarios? Not saying we should, I'm just bringing the point up.
I'm pretty close to that, Betsy, in that I think it's important for your financial plan to be based on the levers that you control, right? And there's a pretty good lag time between the decisions that we make as a council and then when they're going to impact the financials. And growth management is a good example. We, you know, pretty well know for certainty what's going to hit the books next year in terms of valuation. It's already been, you know, it's been in the ground or been being worked on for the past 2 years, you know, starting in planning and then by the time they actually get the work done. So I think more of a forward-looking view is you can start to talk about, well, what kind of growth do we want to target? And we can put some numbers around that. And those really drive a lot of the assumptions in your financials.
Right.
And in your tax base. And I think the way I'm viewing this is it's a tool to be able to help evaluate things like that as they come up. So it should be relatively dynamic. I'm not envisioning it nearly as formal as what San Clemente had. I'm more of, you know what, we want an example, we want to build a school in 4 years. Well, what's that mean? You know, if we run through our, you know, debt service schedule, what's the hit? And how do we take steps to make it less of a significant hit? And there's other examples that I think you can go through, but I'm viewing it more to help inform our decision process as opposed to something that we put out and try to tell the community, this is what your tax rate is going to be in 2 years.
So instead
because we know that's going to change.
Something we could feed different numbers into, like growth rate, right? Like,
yeah.
Like you say, like a new school coming online, or.
But you say growth rate. I don't know what you mean by that, because is it population? Is it number of units?
Valuation, I think.
Oh, valuation. Okay. The one thing I really want to encourage us to do is to take the time and to really let the data help inform the growth management discussion, because for certain, even residential development, not all residential is created equal. Mm-hmm. Some has a much higher return on investment, meaning high value but low demand for service than others. And it's that sort of information that if I were you, I would look very closely to in terms of how we shape the pace of growth for the different types of growth. And that analysis is underway and will be part and available to you in the next 4 to 6 weeks or so. I just hope everyone takes the time to really understand that.
That's a pretty good segue, Tom, and that I did want to bring up. I've been able to catch up on some of the growth management discussions that are taking place in ordinance. And as a finance guy, there's some impacts there that I want to make sure that we're trying to get our arms around. And it sounds like, Tom, the staff may already be working down that path, but I think as a finance committee, we also need to understand the impacts of the decisions we make on growth management, what they are to our bottom line and to the future. So I see some work for us in that
Yeah,
space.
the real problem that we're going to have is that that's the quantitative part of the growth management discussion, right? And I think we can deliver some good information there. But there's also, we all have an experience. There's a qualitative part of our roads getting more congested, or the lines at Hannaford being longer, or, you know, Betsy, you brought up demand on our natural resources, that I can't find a parking spot at Fuller Farm anymore. Those are hard to measure. We can't quantify those, but those are real. And that's part of the angst I think we all feel in this discussion. So that's going to be part of the challenge, is to take the quantitative analysis that we're able to do with some level of certainty and balance that with your qualitative experience.
And I'm assuming the ordinance committee is working through those qualitative factors.
They've asked for it. They've asked for it, and we'll be delivering it. But finance committee may have interest in digging into some of that.
Yeah.
Of course, that's going to happen right in the middle of budget time, but that's the end of the May.
So I guess stay tuned on that one. Betsy and John, do you have any concerns with EOS going down that path and starting to get engaged in the growth management discussion?
No, I think we should. I think like you said, like, if we knew what they were proposing and had a model where we could do some plugging in to see what the impacts might be, that would be, I think, insightful in helping shape, you know, the decisions around whether we support the GMO or not, in addition to the qualitative stuff Tom brought up. So, but Tom, that's happening. It's just not happening through finance. The ordinance committee is doing that. Okay.
Yeah, I just have some fear that not all of them seem interested in that, but staff is committed to it and will produce it. And I'm not saying anything to you that I haven't said to them directly. I just, every chance I get, I'm encouraging you decision makers to consider the kind of the underlying facts associated with growth.
Mm-hmm.
I may be way off base here, but it's not unlike some of the analysis that Karen runs when we are taking something into consideration.
Mm-hmm.
And we have those different factors and what it means to the bottom line. And I know, you know, there's a tool that gets used to do that. So how we pull those two things together, I'm not quite sure, but I do think, you know, understanding the growth piece of it from a financial standpoint, like JA said, would definitely help people make decisions related to that growth management ordinance.
I think that's a great point. In that, I think a lot of what I'm thinking about is probably more along the lines of what, getting back to the forecasting, is what Karen does. And is that something that she could share with us, Tom? In terms of the model that she uses to, it seems like she has a decent model that can factor in, you know, service levels for different types of development and whatnot.
Yeah,
That's
I think
another avenue.
I think you'll find the analysis that we're doing now is going to be far more exact, in that we are able to match particular units, and for public safety, school, and traffic is a little more challenging, but to actually tie impacts to different types of residential units. Whereas Karen's model is really a model for, you know, looking forward. It makes a ton of assumptions. It does assign cost of service to certain types of uses. For residential, it's unit size. For commercial, it's per 1,000 square feet or some such thing like that. So it has its limitations, but it was used very thoroughly as part of the CEA negotiations for the Downs, for sure.
So maybe I'll wait and see what you come up with. It sounds like you're on the right track.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think we've had we don't have a clear next step, but I think what we are going to want to do is inch this forward as we work through the planning process, and maybe just nudge people to talk about what's down the pike. And Tom, I liked some of your suggestions about, and maybe it's staffing costs, what
Yep.
we anticipate.
I think I'll take a run back at this because the model's all built. We're past the reval, which was a big, question mark looming in the future when we did this analysis. So, we reset things. Liam, I think maybe you and I, without too much effort, can go through, update the assumptions, and just rerun this to see what it looks like.
I just would think we have to avoid, that, okay, well, we're just going to put a factor in. Well, we think this will be 3%. Some of those assumptions definitely have to be made. No offense, but if that's all we're doing, anybody could plug that in. So I guess I'm trying to figure out at some point, where we're going to plug in, or are we just going to use it as almost like a modeling tool to plug in, if we build a new school, this hits here and this is what it looks like. So I think it goes back to the slide I'm looking at, agree on the purpose of the planning. So have we done that? Have we agreed on the purpose of the planning?
That's a great topic to cover first, I think, Betsy. I think that's a good place to start for our committee anyways.
Yeah, and define the scope, those two, because, I think I'm kind of hearing we'd like to see it as a modeling tool where we could plug in some factors and see what that looks like. And then that would inform the budget process, the capital plan, and we bounce it back against the comp plan, which was the three things I think we generally agreed on we should be taken into consideration.
Yeah, I think it's capable of doing that, but it does need to kind of factor through and do the modeling of all the underlying operational costs and make some basic assumptions on capital. But you're right, if there's a major capital investment that comes, we can plug that in and see what the effect of that. Admittedly, I was very reluctant and still am to some extent of producing this because I think some, and I don't hear it from this crowd, were intensely interested in what those future tax rates looked like. And I just didn't have confidence that one, they were accurate, and two, that they'd be used correctly, that they'd be used against us somehow. So I must admit, I've always been hesitant for this exercise because no one's really articulated what the goal of it is.
So I think, Betsy, you hit it pretty close there, but I think that's probably something we can cover at our next meeting and try to hone in on what the purpose and goal of this exercise is.
And I think if we do define it, then it makes sense that we can look at for longer than 3 years, because we're kind of trying to look at an out, what does this look like? And knowing the further out you get, the less exact it's ever going to be. But yeah, if the 3-year view was because, we're going to be definitely sticking with that, then that makes that a whole different story. So, once we agree on the purpose and define the scope, I think.
So we'll cover that with our next regular meeting as one of the topics. So I like that. I think that's good progress here. Betsy, I wanted to leave a little time because you did send an email and wanted to give us an opportunity to at least discuss it a little bit.
Sure.
And what our role might be, if any, in evaluating the development at the public safety building, particularly around the presentation that we all were at last night. And I think there's a role for finance to play there, or there should be, I think. And I think when we did the credit enhancement policy, there was a finance committee role as well, in addition to staff work. It was kind of started by staff. But I want to hear your thoughts, or give you an opportunity to at least share your thoughts.
Right. So I don't know if I'm happy to lay out, my thoughts in terms of the merits of why we would or wouldn't do it. I think my primary thought is just that it really seems like in this climate, we probably should just finish it off and have the discussion in an official meeting, and whether or not finance plays a role or not, making a recommendation, I don't know. And just vote, because that would allow the developers to kind of move on if it isn't something that the council is interested in. I think if everybody, if work goes on for months and months and months, and then we say, well, we're not really interested in that. I think that's tough on the folks that are trying to figure out whether or not they're going to be able to make this work for themselves. I have said some reasons why I think it's probably not the right vehicle for the town right now, but I'm happy to say that in a discussion. So I think, we saw the presentation. I think we probably have enough factors with maybe getting a little more information to go ahead and take that issue up and have a vote on it. And then at that point, the developer can decide, what does that mean for them? I think in development, I'm assuming that something that is, a sure thing, knowing something helps to plan. I mean, if this is months in the works and then, they find out at the last, months from now that no, the council's not going to support the CEA. So I guess I would just encourage us to get to a decision point with some more data.
What do you need to make that decision, to have some level of informed decision?
So I think we laid it out in the workshop. I think Paul asked for some numbers. And I asked for some information about what Avesta provides, to their in their communities, and so with Jocelyn, we ran the numbers out. We didn't increase the tax rate or whatever, but we could probably do a little better job on that. And with what Paul asked for, then so I think the question is, do we want the developer to go all the way through our CEA policy? Or do we want to just go ahead and give an answer on this? So that's the question in front of us. So
I guess I'd be fine with an abridged CEA process, but a lot of the information you just talked about is what I would be looking for before I make a decision. So I would want to understand what the economic impact was going to be, what they're asking for CEA versus what's required, maybe what the chances are of them even getting funding from the state, or are we just wasting our time there? I guess there's a couple layers of process that I would actually appreciate being able to benefit from before being asked to make a yes or no.
Right. Although it seemed like you had said you're generally favoring it, even based on what you saw.
I'm favoring the concept. So yeah, I think it'd be a good fit for that area. But typically my decisions are more data driven than that. So yeah, I think it could fit. I think it could work, but I need to look at the numbers before I understand that. What's the increased assessed value going to be? What's the increased tax revenue going to be? It doesn't make sense for the town. And I can't answer those based on the concept that was presented.
Are we gonna get those answers if they go through the CEA process that we outlined?
Ultimately, but I mean, that requires payment of a fee. It awkwardly involves the SEDCO board, which I don't think fits well in this context, frankly. So to John Clucci's point, some sort of abridged version. I think what I hear you saying is what you want to see is their pro forma, which projects value, which certainly has to make assumptions about tax rates. It also makes some assumptions, and there could be several models, as we learned from Jocelyn, in terms of the terms of the CEA, percentage and term.
But I think where the SEDCO piece could come in is this is a strange abridged, this is one piece of property that were part of it's going to be for, not under CEA and part of it would be under CEA. So I would think it's in their advantage to bring forward the whole thing, not just the one little piece, but that would be up to them if they just want us to consider the one building on that piece of property. I think what Councilor Johnson, Chairman Johnson was trying to get at was to try to look at the bigger picture of what the entire property was gonna do. But I'm happy to just look at the actual CEA if that's what we want to do. But
yeah, no, certainly that's important to know what the taxable side of things is. I just don't know how you actually incorporate that into the pro forma for purposes of understanding the mechanics and the financials of the CEA arrangement. But I understand your point.
I don't think you have to put it in the pro forma. I just think you have to look at them side by side, maybe.
Yep.
I just want to say I'm with Counselor Clucci in that, like, I still feel like I need more information before I can make an informed decision. And if it's going through the CEA process in a bridged version, I think that's fine. I guess the question though, John, that you raised is like, what role does this committee play in that? Do we champion it? Do we help drive it? Like, do we make sure getting the information that's needed directly from them? Like, how does that work?
I think if the applicant chooses to proceed, then they would start by working with staff in SEDCO. And there's I forget what step of the process, but it comes to us at some point in the process with some there's some predefined deliverables that they would bring with them. I don't have to be that formal, but I don't want to, I guess it should be applicant led. So they should be deciding that they do want to move to the next step, understanding that there's always risks, right? We could say no. But then when Tom and Karen or thinks it's appropriate to come to us, then I would be fine looking at it. And if it's appropriate, bring that forward to the council. That's an approach that we could take.
Okay.
Right. And it would be at some point good if we could take a step back, to see if something like this even fit, within our overall vision, around growth and housing mix and things like that. Because these things come in front of us in a vacuum, really. And in this particular vacuum, I'm inclined, to say there's other factors outside of what this looks like, in that there was, the taxpayers voted for the new public safety building. They voted to sell the property, and everyone at the time thought it was commercialization that was going to help the tax base. The TIF itself is an economic development, TIF to increase the commercial tax base in particular was kind of a lot of what the discussion was. When we sold the property, that was clear, that was not intended to have the.
So Betsy, I'll make you a press. I'll try to figure out how we might bring some of those discussions to light or forward. We can't solve everything at once, and we are just after our hard stop of 6 o'clock. I'm not seeing anybody from the public in attendance. Can you confirm that, Leo?
That's correct. We have no attendees.
Okay, so I don't think we'll have any public comment today. Do you have, in terms of our next regular meeting, does anybody have any other topics that they would like to cover? You can email me as the month goes on as well.
And again, we're agreed on February 10th for the
February
workshop.
10th at 4,
Okay.
Unless there's a conflict, but we don't have any facilities to book, so we should be okay.
All right.
Okay, good. I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Colette?
Yes, the roll call.
Yeah.
Counselor Anderson,
Yes.
Counselor Glystein,
Yes.
Counselor Clucci.
Yes. Have a great night, everybody.